Welcome to the Garden Angelus, where we talk about flowers, veggies, and all the best dirt. I'm Carol Michael from Indianapolis, Indiana.
And I'm Dee Nash from Guthrie, Oklahoma.
Good afternoon, Dee.
Good afternoon. Is the sun shining in Indianapolis?
No, it's not.
It is finally shining in Oklahoma. Golly, it's been a cold, cold spring.
It has. Yesterday was Mother's Day, and I don't think we got above 50 degrees, and I don't think the sun came out at all. It was always behind the clouds. But last year...
Yes, what happened last year?
On Mother's Day, the high was 88 degrees. It was a new record in Indianapolis.
Right. It was hot here, too, last year, I think. But our cold day was Saturday, and I'm prepping my garden for a garden tour. That I'm going to have an open garden this Saturday. So if people want to know where I live, they can email us at thegardenangelus@gmail.com, and I will give them directions to my garden. I will not put it on the podcast or out directly on Facebook. That seems foolish somehow. But anyway, I worked all day Saturday, and it was cold. It got up to 52.
You know, they say there's no bad weather, just bad clothing choices.
Yeah, I changed clothes quite a bit that day. On, off, you know.
I know.
It was fine. It was fine.
Good. What have we got today, Dee?
I think we're going to talk about salvia, corn, and garden sages.
That sounds interesting.
It does. It looks to me like you have a quote here that you want to share.
I have a quote from Ruth Stout, and we'll tell people who Ruth Stout is when we get done with the quote. She wrote, "In my early childhood, I had some kind of vague yearning to save the world from something or other. Now all I ask is to save a small part of it from overworking in the effort to produce things that are good to eat or are lovely to see."
Lovely to see. Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. She is quite the garden sage.
You know who Ruth Stout is, don't you?
I do know who she is. I love Ruth Stout, and I think her brother Rex was pretty cool, too.
So for our listeners who don't know, Ruth Stout in the early 1950s wrote several books that she's famous for. One of them is How to Have a Green Thumb Without an Aching Back, a new method of mulch gardening.
Yes, which we now call that kind of gardening that she's talking about in that book lasagna gardening. So it's a layering effect, but there were other books. Go ahead.
The Ruth Stout No-Work Garden Book, Secrets of the Famous Year-Round Mulch Method.
I haven't read that one. I read the other one about the green thumb without an aching back because it made me laugh. I found it at a used bookstore, and I became a really big fan. So Ruth Stout was the sister of Rex Stout, who wrote detective novels featuring Nero Wolfe and his assistant Archie Goodwin. He's also famous because anyone who reads detective novels, especially classic ones, loves Nero Wolfe. He was an orchid grower, and he also never left his apartment except for maybe 2 times in all of the books. He and Ruth were both pretty famous for gardening and, in his case, novels.
Huh. So the character Archie Goodwin, do you think that Prince Harry and his wife Meghan Markle named their new baby after Archie Goodwin of the Nero Wolfe detective series?
Well, it works for me. I think it's really surprising that they named him Archie and not Archibald and then called him Archie. But you know what? They're young parents and they can do whatever they want. As far as I'm concerned. They can go for it because I named my kids what I named them, and some people liked those names and some didn't.
So the interesting thing is my brother called me the other day for gardening advice for a friend of his whose garden was a lot of heavy clay soil and wanted to know if there was a way to break it up other than with a big rototiller because nobody had the strength to run a big rototiller. Plus, it's so wet around here, you shouldn't. It'll destroy your soil.
It'll destroy your soil. It does destroy soil, yeah.
And I said the best thing would be to make raised beds and layer in the mulches and the compost and the dirt until you had a nice ground to garden in and skip the tilling.
It's funny that you said that because we have a lot of clay soil in Oklahoma too, and it gets very wet and becomes a great big, bowl if you dig a hole in it. And I always tell people when they ask me that question, I say, build raised beds. It'll just be easier. You can even buy purchased garden soil and put in those raised beds, and then from then on, layer stuff in. Whatever works for you. But I'm telling you, I have one bed that is almost all clay. It's the one that runs along the east side of my house down at the end. And what I did the first year I decided to try to use it is I dug holes for plants that I knew didn't mind wet roots, first of all.
Right.
And then I just started layering shredded leaves. And within 3 to 4 years, that's probably one of the prettiest beds in the whole entire garden. And people are really surprised when I tell them it has clay soil. But every time I dig a hole, there's a layer of really good soil where all those leaves are, and then there's the horrible clay. I dig out those chunks of clay and throw them down the hill. Seriously.
Well, and before Ruth Stout came along and said, just do the mulching on top and let the soil work itself, people used to do something called double digging.
Yep.
Where
I did that in my beginning of my career, and that's cray-cray.
That is heavy, hard work. You dig a trench, and you cart that dirt to the end of the bed, and then you fill the trench with all kinds of compost and mulch and stuff. And then you dig another trench next to it and dump that soil on top of the first trench, and you repeat this process until you get to the end of the bed, or die of exhaustion.
Or decide you hate gardening because you work so hard. So, I don't till anymore. I built some raised beds for some vegetables, and the rest of my garden, I don't till it. I layer.
Yeah,
Layer.
I do too. In fact, I have a tiller that I haven't used for 20 years. I should sell it.
I do too. I have a mantis tiller that just sits in my garage. I should sell it too. But now that we've all told people that they don't have to till, would anybody buy our stuff?
Now the price has gone way down.
Yeah, it has. We've devalued our stuff. She's quite the garden sage, isn't she? Think about it. She was way ahead of her time.
She was. I like her a lot.
I like her too.
Speaking of sages, let's talk about salvia.
Yes, salvias are sages, and that's our flower of the week. Where shall we begin? There are so many different types of salvia, and you and I made a list of several that we grow, and there's so many.
There are. And I'm looking at the list, and I'm not sure which one. I know there's 2 on the list I for sure have. I have Salvia sylvestris, May Night, which you don't like.
I don't like it.
Why not?
Because it dies in the middle of the plant, and it does it pretty quickly here. So it does that thing where it keeps going out to the edge to find more nutrients, and then it dies in the middle. So I have to divide it pretty quickly. I'd rather have a different kind. I like Salvia nemerosa Cardonna.
And why do you like that one?
It doesn't do that, for one thing. It's also the most beautiful blue you've ever seen, and we'll put up pictures of it because I have lots of pictures of it. There's also another one that's pink that's in that same family, which, by the way, that salvia is the perennial of the year from the National Garden Bureau. Nemerosa is. I looked it up. Rose Marvel is another one, and Rose Marvel has much bigger blooms than Cardonna has. I may not be saying that right. It may be Cardonna. But it has much bigger blooms, and I'm looking at it outside my window right now as we're speaking, and it is covered with butterflies and honeybees. And Cardonna also is covered with honeybees. They love that one, but butterflies really love Rose Marvel. They're coming out with a new one this year in that same group called Blue Marvel. I've not tried it yet. Have you tried it?
I haven't. Our salvias are not yet blooming, our perennial salvias. But I went to my little greenhouse and I said, "Do you have Rose Marvel?" And she had some, but she sold them. And she's getting more, and she's putting my name on 3 of them.
And I'm so glad, because you're going to want 6 before it's all over. I'm not kidding. I bought 3 last year, and each plant doubled in size in 1 year. And I was shocked at that, because perennials just don't do that. They do that whole sleep, creep, what's the other one? Sleep, creep, leap. It takes them 3 years to usually bulk up, but this one it's doubled in size. And so I'm going to order 3 more. I can't buy it locally. Nobody here has it.
Well, she's going to get me 3, and then I'm going to go back and ask if she can get Blue Marvel from her supplier.
I think I want Blue Marvel too.
I'm going to see her this evening. I always just give her little notes and put my name on it, my phone number, and say, "Can you get me this?" She's like my supplier.
That's good. It's much better than drugs. Keep telling ourselves that. Blue Hill is another one of the nemerosas, and I do grow it too. It has much smaller blooms, just like Cardonna, but it is a really pretty ice blue, and pollinators like it too. So that kind of is the nemerosa class, and I grow 3 of them, maybe 4 if I get Blue Marvel.
I'm going to be getting Blue Marvel and Rose Marvel for sure.
I hope they grow as well for you as they do for me.
I think they will.
So what's the other salvia? You said you had 3 of them. 3 salvias. I
have a Salvia pretensis Madeline, which is pretty because it's got a white and purple bloom. Sort of a bicolor.
Nice.
And I only bought 1 plant because when I found it at the garden center, that's all they had. And I have not seen it since.
It's interesting because I have a similar salvia to that, and I don't know if it's the same variety, but it does have the bicolored blooms, and it has those same kind of leaves. And I bought it on a sale rack at a box store, and I bought 2 of them, and it does occasionally reseed, but not in a bad way, like a happy way, you know?
Right.
Like, yay, another plant. I grow a lot of these plants. I'm looking at our list. I have grown both in the Salvia farinacea. I've grown both Victoria Blue and Evolution. They're both good plants. Evolution has bigger blooms. I've grown, how do you say that? Black and blues. It means giant salvia. Black and blue. Guaranitica. I guess that's how you say it, something like that. I've grown that one. I've grown, of course, culinary sage. Do you grow culinary sage?
I have grown culinary sage, but it tends to die out here. It doesn't really overwinter very well. So in these parts, I think it is good to grow, and I think it's good just to buy a new plant and even make it a potted up plant. Yeah, buy a new plant every year and make it a potted plant. Mm-hmm. And there are some pretty ones. There's the tricolor, which is variegated. A lot of people like pineapple sage, which kind of has a bit of a pineapple scent to it.
I love the Golden Delicious one. That's a pineapple sage. It has gold leaves and those bright red blooms. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. And so around here, I tell people make that a pot plant and don't try to overwinter it.
Mm-hmm. I can't overwinter Golden Delicious either. But what I do with it is I stick it around my red fountain in the center of my potager, and it looks really good, the red and the yellow against the red fountain. So I love it for that. It's also much beloved by pollinators. What about Mexican bush sage? Does it ever bloom there?
That is not hardy here.
Yeah, it's marginally hardy in Oklahoma in the northern part. So in other words, about where I live, it's marginally hardy. So it's Salvia leucantha. But I think for you guys, it wouldn't be so good because it blooms so late.
Right.
It blooms here in September. So it wouldn't work for you all. But it's great for people down south.
Yeah. And this spring when I was at the garden center, I did buy Salvia pretensis, a dwarf variety called Sweet Petite. It's part of a fashionista series. Most beautiful pink blooms, and it was right before Easter, and I thought that would add a nice little pop of color. So I bought 3 of those and plopped those in the garden, and I really think those are nice. I might have to move them a little further out. They might be too far back in because they are a dwarf.
They're smaller.
There was a bare spot, and they filled it.
That Rose Marvel is also short. So keep that in mind when you get it.
I will.
Do you think that they were blooming because they were in the greenhouse? Because that seems early for you guys.
They were absolutely blooming because they were in a greenhouse. But
so maybe we should talk about that just a little bit, about how, first of all, that people buy stuff in bloom and so greenhouses, they won't sell certain plants like Salvia gregii, Wendy's Wish, because it doesn't bloom until later. So they would have to sell the plants to be planted when they're not in bloom. So customers want to buy stuff in bloom. So they try to bring everything to bloom when they sell it. That's one thing. But also because it's in a greenhouse, it's warmer, and so things bloom. But the problem is you can't always buy stuff in bloom if you want it to bloom later in the season.
Right. And that's true of annuals and perennials, they tend to be in the greenhouse, they bloom sooner, and it gives you a false sense of when that plant is going to bloom. I don't expect Sweet Petite to be blooming next April. I expect it to be blooming next May.
May, yeah. I would think May would be about the right time. Whereas Wendy's Wish Salvia gregii, it doesn't bloom in here normally until, I'd say, I think it's August is when it blooms here. So it's a really good plant to have in my late garden, so that, because my gardening season goes on till October most of the time. So I need those late bloomers to come and help the other stuff. And I definitely have a succession of bloom. You and I have visited gardens up north, further north than you,
right,
up in Minnesota, and everything bloomed at one time.
Oh, yeah.
Because they have that compressed season, right? I don't have that. Mine unfolds very slowly. So plants that bloom in August are really hard to find and great plants for me.
Now, Wendy's Wish, it's a perennial in your garden?
No, it is not a perennial in my garden. I have to take cuttings of it. And it used to be that Steve Owens sold it at Bustani Plant Farm, either Wendy's Wish or the red one. But he quit doing that because nobody buy it because it wasn't in bloom, see?
Right.
So I did find one. I found another Salvia gregii that I bought this week at another plant store, and it was already in bloom, but it shouldn't be. You know,
right,
it's too early. It's a purple one.
Yeah, and when I do some of my talks, sometimes I gently admonish people for wanting to buy stuff always in flower. And it's like, do your homework, and don't be afraid to buy a plant that's not flowering yet, because it will flower. And you'll be delighted and surprised by some of the treasures you can buy that just don't sell well because, like you said, people want to see the flower.
Yeah, like crepe myrtles. If you buy crepe myrtles in bloom, it's the wrong time to plant them here. It's too hot.
That's the only time you see them here. Crepe myrtle is marginally hardy here. We should talk about those this summer because they'll come out. They'll come out in front of the grocery store, especially. Well, let's deal with that later.
Okay, let's deal with that later. Let's talk about the plant family it's in.
It's in the mint family. Lamiaceae.
Yeah. I love these words, Lamiaceae. So it's also known as the dead nettle family.
Yeah, and I like Lamiaceae, but I really like Ranunculaceae better.
And I like Compositae.
And
so there you go.
But next week we're going to talk about clematis, aren't we?
Yes, we are. We're going to talk about clematis. That can be our little teaser for next week. I would love to talk about clematis in all of its crazy forms.
So let's talk about three kinds of sages or salvias.
Okay.
There's the perennial salvias that come back every year. Most of those have a nice big burst of bloom here in late spring. And then, as you said, if you cut those back hard after they bloom, and you're going to want to cut them back because the bloom stalks aren't that pretty, then you can get another flush of bloom later in the year.
Right. You can get at least 2 flushes of bloom.
And then there's also annual salvias. And those around here tend to be sold in flats. There's red, purple, and there's a lovely cream color, and there's also pink. And on those, you should keep deadheading those to keep them blooming.
Right.
Otherwise, they look pretty ratty.
So what's the third type of salvia? You said there were 3. Tropical ones?
The third I would consider the culinary sage.
Ah, gotcha. So culinary sage.
More of an herb.
Which is also a salvia. Yeah, it is more of an herb. Yeah, that's true. Although some of those salvia experts might argue that all salvias are herbs, but, whatever.
So with the culinary sage, I would tell people you really don't want it to go to flower because you're growing it to get good leaves to harvest and use in your turkey dressing.
I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever seen my culinary sage flower, ever.
Really? I don't think I have either.
Maybe it doesn't flower except for in a greenhouse or something. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't flower.
Maybe we're just really good gardeners and know how to take care of them.
Yeah, maybe so. I don't know. Here's the thing I'll say about culinary sage. It does overwinter in Oklahoma if it's in good drainage. So what you want to do is cut it back really, really hard in the spring because it becomes super woody. And you do not want it to become super woody because then you only get leaves on the very ends. You want leaves over your whole plant, plus it's just ugly. So cut it way back. I'd say cut it by half. And don't feel bad about it. I think one of the things we're scared of as gardeners, especially when we start, is that if we cut things back, we're going to kill them, but not very often.
Not very often. And so it's a good reminder that sage, like lavender and rosemary, good drainage is essential for them to survive.
Essential. And then sometimes even, I mean, mine is probably in the best range I can possibly get it in the hottest place. But here's the deal. Sometimes I still lose rosemary. And that's okay. Just go buy a new one. They get big anyway.
We're never going to overwinter rosemary in Indiana unless you have a greenhouse.
It's not hardy enough. No.
So let's move on and talk about something that grows well in Indiana.
It also grows well in Oklahoma.
And that's corn.
And we love corn. Corn is delicious. I don't grow it all the time, and we'll talk about why in a minute, but we love corn.
Yeah, and when we're talking about corn, there's sweet corn, there's popcorn, there's strawberry popcorn, there's field corn, there's decorative corns. So today we're going to talk about a popcorn, and we're going to mostly talk about sweet corn. But we want to talk about a particular popcorn variety called Glass Gem, which came on the market several years ago, and just people went nuts.
They went bananas for it. And I grew it too.
I did too. It is the prettiest corn I have ever grown.
It is the prettiest corn, I think, on the market. And there are some pretty corns because strawberry popcorn is very pretty. All the different ones that are in the strawberry group. But nothing looks like Glass Gem. And you can save the seeds. And you can save the seeds that you think are the prettiest to try to influence your Glass Gem in the following years to even be more colorful. And it's a very interesting corn, and it was found in Oklahoma.
Yeah. And then the guy in Oklahoma kept, and we'll put the link to the story of glass corn, but he kept saving the seed and improving it. And people took notice of it. Mm-hmm. And the next thing you know, it's like the biggest thing to hit the corn market for a long, long time.
Yeah, his name, the guy who did all this selection was Carl Barnes. He was a part Cherokee farmer and breeder who lived in Oklahoma, and he just kept crossing all the decorative corns until he got the seed that he wanted. And one of the reasons that Glass Gem corn is so beautiful is those seeds are kind of translucent. They're kind of pearly. Yes. It is the prettiest corn. I will put up a picture. As soon as this goes up, I will have a picture up of glass corn because I have several, and so does Carol.
Yes, I grew it. I tell people it's a great thing to grow, and it'll bring out the kid in you because every time you pull back that husk, you have no idea what color those ears are going to be, and it is literally every color in the rainbow possible.
It is so pretty. And you can now buy the seeds from Seed Savers, I think Native Seed Search, which is where we originally, I think, got our corn. Did you get your corn somewhere else?
I think I got it from the Native Seed Group, yes.
Yeah. And did we hear about it at the first time? Did we hear about it when we were in Tucson? Is that where we first saw it? Yeah, yes. That was the first time I saw it, and I was like in love, and I had to plant it, and I'm so glad I did. And I will say this, it's a popcorn, but mine didn't pop very well, even though I dried it out. But I didn't care.
Yeah.
I didn't care a bit.
I'd grow it purely for the decoration of it.
It's just so doggone pretty. So, there are lots of other corns, too. We should talk about those and not just Glass Gem.
Well, I would say I do grow sweet corn to eat. And last year I tried a variety called Sweet American Dream, and it was yummy, delicious.
Yummy. Are we going to do that whole thing where we talk about SSE corn versus, because I don't want to. Do we have to do that?
No.
Okay.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Dee.
You don't know about that? Oh, there's different types of sweet corn. And remember early sweet corn back in the day? That type of sweet corn, you had to, literally run out to the corn patch, grab the ear off of the stalk, run back in, shuck that baby, and throw it in boiling water or however you did it. And that's how my grandparents and my aunt did corn. But now we have varieties that stay sweet a little longer. And there's one type that's called an SSE type, and there's another type too. But I don't want to go into all that because it just, I'll be honest, it kind of stresses me out.
Yeah, it's kind of confusing. But I would say the thing about sweet corn is, depending on the variety, the sugars can start to turn to starches rather quickly on some varieties. Mm-hmm. So if you're like, I don't know what variety of corn to grow, we'll recommend, again, over and over and over, go to the All American Selections website and look at the corn varieties that have won an All American Selection designation, because those are ones that have been grown by people across the country and have been judged by them to be superior than other varieties. Avoid all the hype.
Right. Don't read. I mean, because you'll get confused, I think. I think that's a great suggestion. I'm glad you thought of that. Yeah.
So the other thing I was going to tell people, I found out a couple summers ago about German sweet corn. And I'm like, my cousin was telling me, he says, oh, yeah, Grandma fixed German sweet corn. I'm like, what's German sweet corn? And he said they would pick immature ears of field corn and then fry it with sugar.
Really?
And I'm like, that sounds terrible. And he says, we ate it all the time.
How immature are you talking about? Like little ears?
Well, the corn was probably formed but hadn't started to harden like field corn does. Mm-hmm. But I thought that sounded terrible. It's like, why didn't they just grow sweet corn?
Yeah, that sounds disgusting. I'm glad I don't want to eat that. We will not give you the recipe for German sweet corn like Carol's family.
I don't know the recipe. I don't know the recipe. So let's talk a little bit about the misperception that you have to have a big garden to grow corn.
You don't. Mm-mm.
Nope. And I've grown mine in a small garden, and what I do is I reserve a block about 4 feet by 8 feet, and I plant in rows that are about a foot apart. I basically plant 2 or 3 corn stalks a foot on center in that 8 foot by 4 foot block.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Because you have to have at least a 4 by 4 foot block to make it work, because corn is wind pollinated. It's not pollinated by insects, so it has to have enough. It has to have enough tassels to receive the pollen from the top. So it's the silks have to. I said that all wrong. The silks have to be close enough to receive the pollen from the tassels on the corn.
Right.
So they got to be close enough to do that. So your way would definitely work.
Right. And so some people think because corn's a big, tall plant, well, they'll just put one single row across the back of the garden. Yeah. Absolutely don't do that. You'll get very poor pollination. And the way to know you have poor pollination is when you go to open up the ear of corn, pull back the husk, you'll find very few kernels actually formed. And that's a pretty good sign you did not get good pollination of the ears.
And that means that year is too late.
Yes.
So here's the deal. If you have already, I don't think you'd already planted corn by this time, but say you listen to this podcast later and you're planting corn and you've already made the mistake of planting like one long row, you can hand pollinate corn. You can take the tassels and go down and shake them on top of the silks, but that's a real pain. So I hope you don't have to do that.
Yeah, I hope you don't have to do that either.
Just plant it in a block.
Just plant it in a block. And so the other question that people always have is, when is my corn ready? Because you can't really see the ears of corn.
Not really.
So you kind of feel the ear and you kind of feel it's plumping out. You sort of can feel kernels. And then you peel back the top very carefully by the silks. You stick your thumbnail in a kernel. And if the liquid comes out milky, it's ready to eat.
Yeah, I've never done that. I've always pulled it back and looked at it, and if it was fully formed, I went, okay, it's ready to eat. But here's the reason I don't. Here's the reason I don't plant sweet corn out here anymore. I live out in the country. What lives out in the country that loves
raccoons?
Corn? Yes, raccoons. And the bad part is I never got to eat the corn hardly ever, because my space where I grew corn is a little further from the house, and those raccoons always knew right when the corn was ready, and they'd eat all of it in the nighttime.
The same here in my little suburban lot with a privacy fence around it. I don't know. They figure it out.
Well, raccoons are smart.
They figure it out. They are.
They're crummy little creatures, but they're smart little creatures.
They are. So I read a book about Native American tribes and their gardening. I'll have to figure out which book that was. But it impressed me that they would build a sort of a viewing stand over their corn patch, and they would assign people for basically 24-hour guard duty around their corn.
Wow.
Because corn was survival, so they would be people literally night and day watching over the crop, and then they could scare off any raccoons or deer or anything else that would try to steal their crops.
Well, and I imagine that happened with their beans, too, because one time I grew pinto beans just for fun, and right before they were ready to eat, something came through that patch and ate them all and just ravaged it. And I was like, well, I'm not going to do that again.
No. And so you have heard the phrase, don't eat your seed corn?
Yep. Meant you were supposed to save some back, right?
You're supposed to save some back. And I've used that term. I used to use it a lot when we were at work, when I used to work. And the basic meaning is don't sell off your future for the present. Right. And the Native Americans knew no matter how hungry they got in the wintertime, they would not eat their seed corn because then they know there would be no crop in the spring.
Wow.
And so you got to hold stuff back for the future. And kind of part of it was, people would just work intensely and almost burn themselves out and not have any training for the future. And it's like we're eating our seed corn. We're burning these people out. And so I think about that sometimes in the garden. Don't eat your seed corn. You got to save some stuff for tomorrow.
Your energy.
Don't just do it all or try to get it all done in a day.
Yeah, when you're tired, you need to quit or at least sit down and rest for a little bit.
Exactly.
We should talk just really quickly about how you grow your corn. Do you do it in hills? Corn's not the easiest crop for people to grow because it takes a little work.
Well, when you say hills, what I do is I measure off my little 4x8 block, and then I kind of, and I don't use a ruler to do this, but I kind of eyeball about a foot on square, and I do make a little tiny mound, and I'll put like 3, maybe 4 corn seeds in there.
Right, because sometimes one will rot.
One will rot, or a bird will peck it out or something.
Or a bird will eat it. Mm-hmm.
So I plant them, and then if all 4 come up, I usually I'll select one out and just have like 2 or 3 grow on.
Yeah, I do that. Mm-hmm.
And then I will try to throw some organic fertilizer or something on corn. It is a very heavy feeder, likes a lot of nitrogen. And then
because it's kind of like a grass.
It is like a grass.
So that's a good way to remember that it likes nitrogen because grasses like nitrogen. So I always feed mine. I feed mine when they're about, I'm holding my hands up, about 2 feet tall. I mean, I try to feed them a little bit as soon as they come up. And then I fed them again when they were about 2 feet tall.
Well, the old saying is around here, knee high by the 4th of July.
Yeah, I'm eating corn by then, but okay. Or my raccoons are.
We aren't eating corn by then, but our corn is usually about shoulder high by the 4th of July. So that saying must be from a long time ago with much older corn varieties.
Yeah, they must have been really slow. But corn used to be kind of slow.
Yeah.
So far we've talked about how you feed it. I kind of hill up around mine because I don't want them to blow over because I have a lot of wind. So I hill up around them a little bit. And then I basically keep them as weed-free as possible because weeds really compete with corn. Mm-hmm. And then I start looking for corn problems.
And there are 2 corn problems, and I've had them both.
Me too.
So the first one is something called corn earworms, which is the larva of a moth. And
really irritating.
The moth, I guess, lays their eggs on the tip of the forming ear, and then the eggs hatch into these little larvae, which then try to burrow down into your ear of corn, and that's kind of disgusting.
And they will.
You've got a unique way to try to keep them from doing that without using a pesticide.
Right. My grandma Nita When I was a little girl, she would go along with an eyedropper and some oil. In fact, she used, I can't remember, it wasn't like a natural oil. It was that other stuff that people use for things. But anyway, eyedropper and oil, and she would drop just a drop of that oil onto the silks. And for some reason, the little creature can't crawl down into the corn. And if she did it at the right time, which you got to do it just when it silks, I mean, at the very beginning, then you're okay. Well, I don't want to carry around an eyedropper. I don't want to do that. That was too much trouble. So one year I decided I was going to try cooking oil spray, cooking oil spray.
Right.
And so that's what I do. I would spray my tassels pretty heavy when they would, not my tassels. Why can't I get that straight today? My silks. I'd spray my silks with the oil spray. And you know what? It worked. Because here's the thing, where you live, that little corn earworm is not a problem until late in the season, like
right.
August, right? But
Generally.
in Oklahoma, as soon as it silks up, we have problems with corn earworms. And although they only go in the very top at the beginning, if it goes long enough, they'll eat down the whole side of your corn. And I can't tell you how much corn I shucked up in Missouri at my other grandparents' house and my aunt and uncle's house that had earworms. And it's kind of gross because it leaves behind this nastiness.
Yeah, that nastiness is called frass.
Yes, and you can wash off the frass. Frass is insect poop. You can wash it off, but I don't know. As a kid, it kind of grossed me out. So I sprayed mine with cooking oil spray.
Well, my aunt just told me that there was just one worm per ear of corn, and so she said, just cut that tip off with that worm stuff and eat the rest of it. And I've done that, and I'm still alive to tell you about it.
Yeah, me too. I ate that corn also, but down south, it'll go down the whole ear eventually because we get them earlier. They have more time to eat.
That's true.
So the second problem is corn smut.
I've had that. Have you had that?
I've had it on my corn before. I have never eaten it.
Yeah, it's caused by a fungus, and it produces these bluish colored galls on the ears of the corn, and it sort of looked like the kernels turned blue and exploded. And it's a delicacy in some places. Corn smut.
Yes, in some cooking it is a delicacy. No, thank you.
No,
That's all I'm saying about that.
Not doing it. And so if you have corn smut, throw that corn away. Don't put it in your compost pile. And for many reasons, corn earworms and corn smut being two of them, and then corn being a heavy feeder, rotate it in your garden and give it a different spot every year. That's always good.
Yep. And there's also, if you only grow things in containers, there's also a newish corn that's called On Deck that's put out by Burpee. And you can actually, it's short and you can grow it in pots. Again, you're going to want to grow plenty of stalks so it can wind pollinate, right?
Right.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And to me, it's like that's more of a novelty thing. You're not going to get a big harvest and have corn to freeze and all of that kind of good stuff.
No. I never had enough to freeze anyway. Now, my relatives did. I wonder if they positioned their children outside for 24 hours a day to watch their corn.
I don't know. And then for some people, there's also variegated corn. And by variegated corn, I mean the stalks are variegated leaves. There's some that are green and white and some that have green, white, and red. There's one from Select Seeds called Field of Dreams that looks really pretty. And you would grow this just for the value of the foliage. It would be a back-of-the-border kind of plant just to add something interesting.
Yeah, that's neat. I never thought about that. And people use corn stalks as decoration, too, in the fall. They actually purchase them now.
Yes.
So there you go. You could grow your own decorations.
So that's about all we have to say about corn. You got any corny jokes?
I do not have any corny jokes today. Do you?
No. We'll pass on the corny jokes. Let's go back to our dirt. We started on that. And you and I got to thinking about sages, and that there were a lot of garden sages that from the past that we like to quote.
Yes, and people that we learned from when we were becoming gardeners. There's a bunch of them. So we thought of several that we really thought had, and so what do we think of as a garden sage? It's somebody from the past, a gardener that you can refer back to over and over again when you're seeking good old-fashioned know-how and sentiment.
Yes.
Because a lot of gardening is about sentiment, really.
Yes, it is.
It's really about love.
Yes, and there's Elizabeth Lawrence, whom we both like.
We really love Elizabeth Lawrence, and we talk about her quite a bit.
Yeah, and J.I. Rodell from the Rodell Organic Gardening. I like Liberty Hyde Bailey.
I'm not familiar with Liberty Hyde Bailey at all. We'll have to look up a quote for...
Right.
Is Liberty a guy or a girl?
He's a man, and he grew up in Michigan, and then he worked at Cornell, and he wrote lots of books around the turn of the 19th century, 20th century.
Cool. Also, I loved Cassandra Diaz.
Dance?
Dance, sorry. I don't know why I said Diaz. Cassandra Dans. She was Mrs. Green Thumbs.
Yeah, she wrote 2 books. She sadly passed away far too young, but she was just a lot of fun.
She was a lot of fun, and she was published in she published in, I don't know if it was Country Living or Country Gardener, I can't remember, but she was published in a magazine, which was how I first learned about her, and she just always made me smile and laugh, and I loved what she said about composting. She said, I'm a lazy composter. I do not try to get a hot compost pile, don't care about a hot compost pile. Basically, she piled it all up in a corner and dealt with it when she was in the mood to deal with it.
That's me.
Me too.
Of course, there's Thomas Jefferson, famous gardener. I hear he was also a president.
I've heard that. I've heard that he was a president and that he owned a place.
Yeah.
A place that is quite famous still.
Yeah. We talked about Ruth Stout.
Yes. And one of my heroes is Dr. Griffith Buck,
whom I've never heard of.
Dr. Griffith Buck created disease-resistant roses, and almost all of the disease-resistant roses that are on the market today have buck rose parentage in them. And he was I want to say he was at Iowa State University, but I need to look that up again just to make sure. I think it's right. And he just basically put the roses out in a field, and so his roses that made it are also very cold tolerant.
Good.
Yeah.
So there's a ton of them out there, and we'll share some quotes from them periodically in our various episodes. But you found a quote from Elizabeth Lawrence that I think is really sweet.
I think it's one of the best quotes she has, and she has so many because she had a newspaper column in 2 different newspapers that went on for years and years. There is a place in every childhood, an enchanted place where colors are brighter, the air softer, and the morning more fragrant than ever again. Wow.
That's really neat.
It is.
And, of course, that place is a garden.
Absolutely. All gardeners, deep down in their little hearts of hearts, are just children still playing in the dirt.
That's right, Dee. Who said that? You said that.
Me.
Well, that's a good thought to end up with, because we both want to go back out and start playing in the dirt, even though it's cold out.
It's not cold here. It's warm here today. We finally got warm today. It's 82, in fact.
Okay. Well, I know you want to get out to the dirt.
I do want to get out to the dirt.
People can find us on Instagram. They can find us on Facebook. They can find us on Twitter. They can email us at thegardenangelist@gmail.com. We're on iTunes, Spotify, basically any place where you can download podcasts.
Absolutely. So please feel free to subscribe. And if you listen to us on iTunes, would you give us a good rating? Because that helps us rise in the stats.
And with that, Dee, it was lovely to talk to you over the garden fence today.
It was lovely to talk to everybody, and especially to chat with you. Have a great day, Carol.
You too. Bye now.
Bye.